Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We're going to try something a little bit different on the show today, as I got a lot of feedback from listeners saying sometimes the episodes on very important topics, and what they would like is a bit of a summary of what were the main takeaways. I do go into this at the end, I would say at a very superficial level, and we're all about going deep on this podcast. So we're going to start with the most recent episode, which is from Mags. And in that, obviously, we talked, the main theme was around the responsible use of psychedelics. I've actually got with me today Tom Jenkins, who is another person who talks about ayahuasca and psychedelics on the show. But Tom, what do you think were the main questions that we should be talking about in terms of recapping really the things that Mags was talking about on the show?
I think the big thing is we're talking a lot these days about a psychedelic renaissance, and in short, it's the psychedelic renaissance has kind of always been happening. It's just it kind of went more into the background, but now it's kind of sort of much more forefront in, especially in countries like the US and the UK now, and it's how we can the responsible use of psychedelics, respecting indigenous cultures. And that was a big thing Mags talked about. So potentially you could touch on that.
Yeah, 100%. I think what I liked around Mags was she was talking about, because I asked her, how do you integrate? Because she was talking about this thing, integration from your experience. And I don't think integration is just necessarily something from psychedelics. Any type of spiritual experience, whether you're doing breath work, whether you're meditating, whether you're religious, praying, or whether you take psychedelics, it's how can I integrate this into my life? How can I learn from this experience to make positive changes in my life? And I liked Mag's recommendation, actually, which is about community. So if it's psychedelics, speak to other people who have gone through this experience and have had positive transformation, right? They transform their lives in a way, and Mags is obviously talking about like integration circles. But again, if we take this outside of the context of psychedelics, like meditation, breath work, speak to people who you respect who have meditated and they changed their life in a positive way. Those are the people that you want to surround yourself with. And then again, if you do psychedelics, I think what's really important is to take notes afterwards, right? Write down notes. What were your visions? What did you see? And even if you don't understand those visions at the time, afterwards it's going to be quite powerful. So actually, if I think of my own story with psychedelics, I remember when I took psychedelics, funnily enough, so this ayahuasca. So I took ayahuasca twice, and I remember the second time I actually had visions of the bridge. So I actually wouldn't be doing this podcast today if it wasn't for that. And there was actually bridges symbolically that I needed to build with some family members, with some friends. And at the time I didn't really understand, but I remember writing notes afterwards like bridge, and I had it. And as time went on and chatting to friends and family, I realized what the bridges were that I needed to build with some friends. And then obviously that kind of actually led to this podcast happening, which is quite interesting.
So you've obviously had many spiritual experiences yourself. You just summarized one key one there, and it's led in a way to us being sat here. But having listened to this or been through and kind of been a host on this most recent episode, now going back to, you've had many different spiritual experiences from many different realms, breath work, ayahuasca, with your family and more. Do you think any of the advice that Mags gave in the episode would now help you if you had a new spiritual experience to really be able to integrate that into your life in a more powerful way? And if so, what would that be and how would you go about doing it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's that community which she talked about, right? So I think the last time I took ayahuasca, was actually before you went on your whole journey, Tom, right? With what you're doing now with retreats and then obviously before I'd spoken to Mags. So I think one of the things I would do is have more conversations with other people that had been through the same thing. And again, I think I'd known people that had taken ayahuasca and psychedelics, but a little bit more kind of like to trip out versus I'm doing this to really work on myself, to make myself a better person, to heal trauma. As Mags said, it's not always about healing trauma. It wasn't really the case for Mags. I wouldn't say it was the case for me. But what I did want to do through ayahuasca is really become more in touch with myself and become a better person, right? So contacting and connecting with people who have that type of mindset. And again, that would be someone like yourself, Tom, or someone like Mags, or even she talked about these like integration circles. So I think what happened after my last ayahuasca experience is, even though I wrote all these things down and these like very strange visions that I had, I didn't really talk to people about them. I read these books around like ayahuasca and spiritual experiences and things. And through that, things started to make sense. And then I started discussing with other people, but I think I could have done it from the start. And again, we're all individuals. We need to be able to interpret these things ourselves, but sometimes we do need guides from other people. And I think I'm quite an independent person, but I think I was quite insular in my ayahuasca experience. And I think I could have shared it with more people to really help me understand, like, what did these visions mean that I was looking at?
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying there, because I have a great community around me, and there's always someone to speak to about, I'm more involved in the ayahuasca and psychedelic space, but I know breathwork people, yoga people, and there's a huge group of people who I can speak about with anything to, and it just always opens new doors and new insights. And yeah, it's really interesting what Mags was talking about there. And I know something she was very passionate about is the indigenous voice in these sacred medicines. So with ayahuasca, that comes the Amazonian tribes, but sort of you being in London, yoga's a bigger thing there than ayahuasca, obviously, and that stems more from India, Nepal, and the Himalayas. So if you could just touch on some of the stuff Mags was saying about keeping the ancient traditions alive in every medicine and spiritual journey that we go through.
Yeah, Mags talked about the ayahuasca pill, which I thought was as horrifying as she thought it was, because it is really about the journey, right? So again, if you're looking for a quick fix, don't look at ayahuasca, because ayahuasca is really just it can be the first step on like a long spiritual journey for people. Mags talked about how she was like a hardcore atheist, and now she's like become more spiritual. I know you kind of went on that journey as well. I've never been like atheist myself, but certainly things like ayahuasca have made my faith even stronger. But with the indigenous voice, I think with shamanism, and let's just talk around Amazonian culture where ayahuasca comes from, is the process, the ritual is hugely important, and there's great respect, and they really respect the medicine, right? And obviously we talked about that as well, that this is a medicine. This is not like a recreational drug you're going to trip out on. So it's really important to respect that ritual. And I think if you respect the ritual, then you're also respecting where does it come from? And obviously it comes from these indigenous cultures, like within the Amazon. So I think that's the key thing. I think maybe some of the people that aren't respecting the indigenous cultures is actually that step. They don't respect the ritual. They're like, hey, the only reason these people are good for me is that they're providing this thing that comes from their community, which I can use to trip out and have all these visions, right? And that's the only good thing they are to me, versus they're almost a gateway to this like spiritual experience where I can have these visions and I can learn. So I think it's really about the process. And then we also talked about with Mags, like the preparation is really important. So there's loads of things with ayahuasca, which maybe you can talk about, Tom, as well, like not drinking before, like there's certain foods that you can't eat. Take those things very seriously, because if you don't, one, you can have a really terrible experience. It can actually be very dangerous to like trip on ayahuasca, but that's also, it's respecting the medicine and it's respecting the rituals and the cultures. It's like same way if a doctor says to you, fast for 24 hours before you do the surgery, you're going to do it. And it's the same with ayahuasca. It's a medicine. So you need to respect that ritual and that culture.
Yeah, for sure. And it's ayahuasca is used across all different South American countries where the Amazon is present. So where you go, actually, the kind of rules, and not so much rules, but guidelines before you go always vary depending on even the tribe within the countries. But it's important that when you go, you listen to the shaman, the taita, what preparation guidelines they have for the specific rituals and the way they do the ceremonies. And, you know, a lot of times that does involve specific diets. A lot of that involves different preparation techniques. And the more you listen to the people you're trusting with this, and that's really important. It is a process of trust from both the shaman to us and us to the shaman. And the closer that bond and integrated trust is, the more powerful the experience is going to be in the end. So that's really, really important. And yeah, just moving on to one more question. We've touched on integration, we've touched on community, and we've touched on the indigenous traditions. Is there anything else that really stood out to you from the podcast, that you think, any key takeaways that we haven't talked about that yet, that you think somebody could really help apply to their lives from what Mags was talking about?
I think from the pre-prep, right? Because obviously we talked about the integration, which is after the ceremony, right? But then you've also got what's really important is the intention before the ceremony. So again, we talked about the worst case scenario, which is like, my intention is to trip out because this is a recreational drug like cocaine or something that I'm just doing. And even other psychedelics, which also have medicinal purposes, say like psilocybin, which is in magic mushrooms, right? A lot of people are doing those in an irresponsible way, like they're going to a nightclub, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with going to a nightclub, right? But really, these medicines aren't for that environment. They're more for like healing, right? So that we've obviously talked about that in like in a negative way, but I think a lot of it in a positive way is the intention. So really, because there'll be people listening to this, probably the majority have never taken something like ayahuasca, but if you have taken something like it, the next time you do it, or if it's your first time, think, why am I doing this, right? And this is obviously a big thing we talk about in the Cosmic Bridge, which is the why. So why am I doing this? And you should have a good reason. And Mags actually talked about, like, she had quite basic reasons sometimes, but they were still really powerful. It's like, I want to learn more about this medicine so that I can write about it and I can help other people in their journey, which is actually a great cause. Or the first time, I really want to get more in touch with myself, right? Or I know a lot of people that may be at a crossroads with their life and they're not sure about their work, or they're not sure about a relationship with a family member, or maybe they're going through grief, right? And they take ayahuasca because those are all really great reasons. And I don't think it means you have to be very narrow-minded, because I've taken ayahuasca with people before. They've gone in with one reason and they've kind of gone a little bit there, and then the medicine has taken them in a different direction. I know that's certainly happened to me a lot of times, but it's still important you go in with the right intentions. So really think in the days before, why am I doing this? Why am I going to take ayahuasca? Why am I going to take psilocybin, right? Or anything else? And I think you're going to have a much better experience. And then going to the preparation as well is, like, other spiritual experiences are actually going to help you a lot. So the first time I took ayahuasca, I remember in the day before the ceremony, in between the ceremony and the day after, we had, he was kind of like the assistant shaman, and he was doing like meditation exercises with us. It was actually, I think this was 2016. And believe it or not, this was the first time I ever did any type of meditation, right? And the first ceremony I ever did, the shaman actually said to me, he's like, you're being too stubborn. He's like, you wouldn't open up. And looking back on it, I think I was quite stubborn, but it's also wasn't into meditation then. And almost like when you're meditating, you're not really thinking in a way, you're just kind of like relaxing and focusing on your breath. So in the years in between, because I then did 3 years later, I took it in Peru afterwards. In those intermediate 3 years, I actually got really into meditation. And because of that, the next time I took ayahuasca, it was like instantly I was having this very profound experience that some of the other people that hadn't taken ayahuasca before didn't have. So that actually really helped me. So that was a bit of a long-winded way of saying, if you're into anything, like you talked about yoga before, meditation, breath work is something I've done since actually my last ceremony in 2019. So first I got into meditation and I got into breath work. If I was to do ayahuasca again, I would be looking at doing breath work in like the weeks before as well. And say you're religious, like pray, right? So put some of these other spiritual experiences in your preparation before ayahuasca and thinking, why are you taking it? That would be my other advice. And that obviously goes into what Mags was talking about with intention.
Yeah, for sure. And it was a fantastic episode. There was so much to take away. And, you know, I've been involved in this work for a long time now. And I know many people who drink ayahuasca kind of constantly throughout the year and make no concrete changes in their lives. And yeah, I know other people who have one spiritual experience, you know, sort of like Mags, how she was doing a job she didn't like. The ayahuasca showed her she could really see deep into that, and from one day to the next she just completely shifted her focus in her career, and now she's really successful in what she's doing, and she's passionate about what she's doing. Yeah, so many other people talk about the love that comes from these spiritual experiences, but then don't apply that to their lives. And then sort of people begin to question, well, is what you're saying actually true, because you haven't applied any of it with your actions?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks a lot for listening. Obviously, this is a new format, so please leave a comment on YouTube or send me a message if you know me. Let us know what you think about this new format. We've done this based on your feedback, but this is essentially really to give you that recap of these takeaways that you can implement in your life. As always, subscribe to us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple, whatever your favorite podcast platform is, if you haven't already. And if you thought this topic was really powerful and someone could learn from it, share it with your friends, share it on social media, share it on WhatsApp or whatever you use. And we'll see you next week on the next episode of The Cosmic Bridge.